Hello and welcome to another Reaconteur video, and in today's video I will be showcasing every mantra in Deepwoken. Make sure to subscribe since only about 20% of the people watching right now are actually subscribed. And also I'm currently live on Twitch ranking your Deepwoken drip, so come into the stream. And also, just so you guys know, I will not be covering oath mantras in this video. I literally made a video on every oath, so go watch that one if you want to see the oath mantras. Now let's get straight into it. Starting off with Flame Charm, first up is Fire Blade, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a blade of fire and it comes down fairly quick. Guard breaking as long as you have it upgraded to level 5, then it will always guard break no matter how much posture your opponent has. It also has a special variant for Star Kindred users, which is way stronger and has more range, but is not as fast, so it's kind of a little bit of a trade-off, but generally it's considered better than the stock one. Next up is Flame Repulsion, which charges up to dispel flames in an AoE around you. The much more popular Spring Spark variant is inspired by Gojo's Reversal Red, and instead of being a large AoE around you, it is a projectile which has a small AoE after its explosion and eruption. Next up is Burning Servants, a large AoE of burning men who spear the person in the middle of it with you. The Reversal Spark variant makes them attack outwards and also ragdoll, so this mantra it's kind of mid. I don't really recommend using it, but you could use either versions of it, the Spring Spark or the regular, just depends on your preference. Fire Gun is our next mantra, and this thing just kinda sucks. You can modify it with the Round Spark, which makes bullets split, or the Blast Spark, which lowers the base damage, but makes the mantras have a chance to explode. You can also just use both, but ideally you just aren't using this mantra, because Fire Gun is not good. Next is Flame Grab, another reskinned mantra like Burning Servants. It is a command grab that slams someone down, and honestly this and most of the really early mantras are kind of mid. You're gonna see a lot, and I mean a lot of duplicate mantras in here. Like Burning Servants has another variant and a different attunement, and there's a grab for just about every attunement. Now, while Flame Grab is mid, that brings us to Fire Palm, a mantra that is good that I personally love. You stick your hand out, letting a bunch of flames out, hitting anyone in a cone shape in front of you. And it was also recently buffed, making Wildfire talent a default behavior for it, making it so that way you can hold F to make the AoE shorter, but wider, meaning you could hit more people potentially. Next up is Flame Blind, inspired by Phoenix's Blind from Valorant. You shoot up a little projectile that blinds anyone looking at it, or just in its area. The Concussive Flash talent also dazes anyone hit by it, so with the talent and a Wayward Gem, Flame Blind can result in a free hit or two, or potentially even a good combo starter. And also Logstones can make the blind last longer, which is worth considering. Next up is Fire Eruption. Elden Ring actually stole this move to use in the Godric boss fight. That is confirmed. You stick your weapon into the ground and deal 2 blasts around you, dealing a lot of damage, and you can also increase the AoE size with magnifying stones. Another good mantra being Fire Forge is up next. You throw 3 daggers in a cone in a 45-degree radius in front of you, dealing damage but not inflicting burn unless you have the Hell's Partisan talent. Putting a Tornado Spark on it makes all the daggers go in a straight line using VFX clearly made 3 years after Deepwoken's initial release, because they are way better than anything that would have existed 3 years ago. Next up is Relentless Flame, a very strange mantra where you slash in front of you, and if it connects, it lets out like 5 more slashes. And honestly, this mantra is kind of lame, but it does look like a type soul move from the Heat Shrift. I forget which one though. I think the Fire Blade, it looks just like that. Next up is Flame Sentinel, which is the most comical thing they've ever added. You summon a turret that shoots fire at people, and putting a Magnet Spark on it makes it follow you instead of flying around in a radius in front of it. Rising Flame is next, and it might be the lamest mantra in this entire video. You bring someone up and slam them down. Boring, lame, hate this move. If you use it, boring. Next up is Flare Volley. You shoot out a fireball. That's it. Sometimes it can pass through walls to go to people, that's just it. Next up is Ash Slam. Used to be amazing, it's still alright, but it is a hybrid strength and flame charm mantra, which is like a better Fire Eruption, as it has more mobility, however, also more end lag than Fire Eruption. And next up is Flame Ballista, inspired by Sukuna's Fuga. It is a big flame arrow you send at people. You can use M1 to send it early, sacrificing charge time and damage, as slight aim assist, and if it's blocked, it gets ricocheted, which doesn't really make sense, but it's a pretty cool addition, so good job, devs. And next up is Flaming Scourge, which might be the most original mantra in the game for a few reasons. Now, I noticed, I said the other one looked like a Type Soul move. This is literally just Sero's Scourge from Type Soul, slightly renamed, reskinned, and repackaged. Someone was running out of ideas while making this, but it is quite cool regardless. But you guys could have at least changed the name. Like, really? Sero's Scourge. Flaming Scourge. They're the same move. Next up is Flame Leap, our first mobility mantra, which is just a big jump. However, putting a Reversal Spark on it will turn it into a long jump. It's quite good. Next is Flame Wisp, which converts burn damage you deal into self-healing. Definitely the best Wisp in the game, and, you know, after Flame Charm we'll cover Gale Breath, which has the worst Wisp in the game. It's terrible. But anyway, Graceful Flame is up next, and is a portable campfire with some limitations, like no cooking for some reason. If you have Undying Flames talent, you can also use it in only Layer 1 of the Depths, but not Layer 2. And next up is Flame of Denial, inspired by Dark Souls' Tears of Denial. This mantra prevents you from dying while it's active, healing you if you reach fatal health values. Onto Gale Breath, starting out with Windblade, which is actually just a projectile. There's not really much to say about it here. Shoot your blade out, letting out a gust of wind in front of you. It's alright. There's also Air Force, which is a little Kamehameha Goku projectile that knocks people back, doing some decent damage. It also dazes people if they collide with a wall, which can be used to keep people locked in combos. A Reversal Spark also pulls people into you instead of pushing them away, which can be used to start combos, but it's generally not that great. Then there's Tornado Kick, which is a long-range mantra that brings you up into the air to kick air at your opponents. And also they somehow explode on impact despite being air. I don't know what the devs were thinking with this one. But the next one is Gale Lunge. I don't even need to put the gif up for here, but I will anyway. This is one of the best mantras in the entire game. It's one of the best chaser mantras. It is the best chaser mantra in the game. A lunge with low end lag and startup, giving you the ability to chase people or run using this mantra, and it also does pretty good damage for what it is. And next is Tornado, which throws out a tornado dealing ticks of damage to people inside of it. It is honestly still just as bad as pre-rework, but pre-rework was like another level of useless, because if it parried, you got hit stun, and your opponent couldn't do anything either, so it just wasted your ether and time. And it's still kinda like that, it sucks. Up next is Gale Trap, which really isn't that great of a move against better players. The best part about it is that it procs Suffocate, but most people just use it to bait blocks for a guard break, but it's still not even really great for that though, because you can just block the Gale Trap and immediately dodge to not get guard broken. So it really isn't worth using most of the time. And next up is Gale Punch, which is a punch of Gale. The Vacuum Punch talent also allows you to suck people in for follow-ups after the Gale Punch, which can be used by pressing F. But a lot of people can get punished for this if they're not using it properly and overuse it, so don't spam it and use it more of like a mix-up tool. Next up is Wind Forge, and I actually love this mantra. It summons swords around someone, making them stand still to parry them, and the multiplying spark makes them come from different directions. This mantra is alright, but I actually just think it's really cool. Next is Twister Kicks. It is just a green tornado kick. That is quite literally it. Onto Champion's Whirl Throw. You grab them breaking blocks at level 5, and it does quite a bit of damage. It can also throw people into walls, dazing them and proccing breathing impact on the wall hit. Up next is Rising Wind. An uppercut and up tilt that does pretty decent damage, and pressing F during the rise kicks your opponent down, dazing them. This mantra is pretty good. Usually people do the kick down, but not doing it can actually make it better for combo extending, and since the option of kicking is always there, this mantra has a built-in 50-50 mix-up, which is pretty cool. Next up is Wind Gun, a gun that shoots wind, but also has sparks. The multiplying spark makes it a shotgun with more potential damage, but each individual shot does less damage. But don't worry, it's just buckshot, so you won't really take too much damage even if they all connect. For human-sized targets at medium range, I'd recommend slugs for lethality and birdshot for stopping force. Anyway, there is also the blast spark, which changes it from buckshot to slugs. If you don't know what this means, it means it's better. Also, you can increase the effect of these by adding an extra spark, or even both of them, and you can do a maximum of 2 each. But don't do that, just use one. That one being the blast spark variant, because it's better. Next is Wind Carve, which is just an AoE of slashing wind about the size of 2 people standing directly next to each other. This mantra is quite mid, and it's also a reskin of Lightning Carve, which we'll talk about later. Since that mantra was mid, let's talk about the GOAT, and I mean the GOAT of mantras here, Astral Wind. It's star-shaped for a reason, because this is the star of Gale Breath. The last hit of it, when fully upgraded, also has a chance to ragdoll and send people upwards even if it's parried, which is kind of weird. Putting Cloud Stones on it also makes the AoE bigger, but it makes the mantra slower, and actually it can be so slow the maximum duration I've seen of it was 7 seconds to cast this one mantra. Don't be that guy. It's not fun to play against, it's just annoying. And finally, Pillars of Arisia for the combat mantras, which has the unique requirement of having to beat the Duke before it will show up in your mantra pool. It is very good though, I love this thing. The first mobility mantra is Wind Passage, which has no right to be a mobility mantra considering the fact that it does just as much damage as Astral Wind. And finally, we have Gale Wisp, the most disappointing mantra in the game, and I'd actually say Gale Wisp is the worst mantra in the game, where Flame Wisp converts flame damage into self-healing. Gale Wisp reduces fall damage you take by 30%. Fall damage is one of the least lethal forms of damage in Deepwoken. This thing sucks. There's so few times when fall damage is really going to matter. There's like 2 places in the entire game where I can think of where you're going to take fall damage, and one of them is Hive, and nobody plays around there anyway. Most people are in Chime. The Gale Wisp is terrible. It's so bad. I don't care about the other passives because they're so negligible it doesn't even matter. Anyway, starting out Thundercall is Lightning Blades. This thing is exactly what it sounds sounds like. It's a flurry of slashes with electricity on your sword, and putting a magnet spark on it makes it a bootleg wayward gem that makes the third slash proc a teleport after hitting, which is actually pretty good. Next up is Jolt Grab. I'm sure you guys have noticed the trend of early mantras very much being elemental reskins. Jolt Grab is just another grab, and it's quite lame. However, this is probably the same as like Flame Grab, but then Ice Grab is just super cool, but we'll talk about that later. Next up is Lightning Beam. This is literally just Masenko from Dragon Ball. I know, you might not know what that means, but if you do know what that means, you realize that I'm right. And next up is Electro Carve. It's just another reskinned mantra. This is just Wind Carve but electricity. Thunder Call might be the least original skill set in this entire game. Anyway, next up is Fleeting Sparks, the first original lightning mantra. Funnily enough, it got turned into the Smite Bell later on. Anyways, it's just ball lightning projectiles. Like, it's inspired by the real-life nature phenomenon called ball lightning, which is literally just a ball of lightning, and you summon those. Anyway, next up is Lightning Impact, which makes me wish I didn't have to talk about Thunder Call in this video, because I'm just now realizing how lame these mantras are. You grab someone and slam them down. That's it for this one. Thunder Call is so uninspired. But next up is Lightning Clone, where you summon, get this, a Lightning Clone that M1s your opponent one time for a single hit's worth of damage before it dies. With that being said, the Spark versions of this mantra are so much better, it is never worth using stock. Like, a Blast Spark makes them do an extra hit with the Lightning AoE on death, and a Multiplying Spark makes 2 clones, and you can use both Sparks for 2 clones that hit and then die and release an AoE burst. There is zero reason to ever use this mantra stock, because one Spark or both Sparks is so much better than just this mantra on its own. Next up is Lightning Strike. Can you guess what this one does? Me neither. It applies knockdown if the first strike lands, and can be modified with multiplying sparks to increase the amount of strikes done. Although, after the first few strikes, it's kinda hard to get people to land in them, because the knockdown only guarantees the second hit if the first one lands. And then there's Storm Blades. What do you guys think this does? I'm sure if you haven't seen it, you probably couldn't guess it. It summons 5 blades, made of lightning, around your opponent, and then zaps an AoE inside of that little circle that they make. For some reason, it had to be blades, though. They couldn't just make it like a little, I don't know, anything else. The Tornado Spark variant, however, is the coolest, most useless shit ever. You conjure up the Thunder Dome, making an AoE circle that drags people in and zaps them if they touch the edges, and can't be left until it's down. It's like a mediocre domain expansion, but the only sad part is that Ice has a better version of this coming up later, and it really doesn't last long enough to where, like, oh, if someone's running, this is going to be the huge deciding factor unless you can get your entire team in there. And next up is Grand Javelin, inspired by Dark Souls. You throw a beam of lightning at people, and if you have Grand Skewer, it can be used to carry people with it by charging it up with F. And a multiplying spark makes it so you throw 3, and they are faster and smaller, but they throw in like an arc pattern. Next up is Bolt Piercer, which is simultaneously useless and the highest damaging mantra in the entire game. This thing is literally only good for hitting people on campfires because it's got such a long windup and is so easy to react to. The only saving grace it has is its massive range that allows you to cast it from 70 feet away from someone, and the fact that it is the highest damaging mantra in the entire game, meaning that when it does work, it works really well. And next up is Emotion Wave. You harness your anger, releasing it with a big AoE of lightning strikes. Rah, angry. This thing's alright, I guess. I don't really play Thunder Calls, so yeah. Next is Rising Thunder, where you carry someone up into the sky, slamming them down, not unlike 2 other mantras we've already seen or will see, dealing some pretty good damage and stunning anyone hit by it to keep them open for the next combo. This is actually really good with hybrids because it used to, and I don't know if it still does, combo into Ash Slam. Anyway, the first support mantra, Lightning Stream, pulls people into you, but with a Reversal Spark will pull you into people. And with the Blast Spark, it makes it deal damage and stun, but it removes the pull. Thunder Wisp makes it so hitting someone with a flourish or uppercut applies sapping, which increases mantra cooldown. Once the sap duration ends, they get zapped. Then there's Spark Swap, which swaps places between you and the person you cast it on. It can't be used in water in the air to prevent people from killing people instantly with it or jumping into voids and stuff, but it is quite good. What you could do if you wanted to kill people with it, though, is get your friend with strong left and then line yourself up with the edge. Teleport someone and replace them with you and have your friend strong left them off. You're welcome. If you die to this method, I'm not the one that created it. So don't get mad at me, I just put people onto it. Anyway, the first mobility mantra is Lightning Assault, which uses the exact same VFX as Rising Thunder, but horizontally instead of vertically. It is pretty good mobility though. And then there's Lightning Cloak, a cloak of, you guessed it, lightning, which makes you run faster and turns your dash into short-range teleports. It can last anywhere from 6 to 60 seconds with modifiers and is overall very good. And thank God we are done with Thunder Call, it is so insanely boring. But onto Frost Draw, with the first mantra being Ice Spikes, which is a big spike of ice. Who would have guessed? Next up is Ice Beam. It is a long beam of ice that freezes thing it touches. Most ice mantras put ice on the floor to proc talents like St. J and like the one that puts the little ice meteors around you. I forgot what it's called. But this is one of the best mantras for doing that, as it puts ice everywhere along where the beam travels, which is really good. Next up is Warden's Blade, which is an AoE of spinning blades around you, dealing damage to people who get too close. This move actually inspired the Type Soul Quincy Yamato crit. Not really a relevant detail to this video because it's a Deepwoken video, but this is the inspiration for that. Then there is Frozen Servants, which is identical to Burning Servants but ice, and it procs frost. You can tell it was made in the early days because all they did was change Burning Servants' color, and they changed burning in the code to chilling. Next up is Frozen Ice Daggers, which is a ranged mantra which throws ice daggers at people. Who knew? And with the Frozen Pincushion talent, it freezes people on contact for like 2 seconds, which can actually allow you to get a free hit or two in. It's really good with things like Ice Smash and Ice Lance. Next is Ice Blade, which is the best version of the Blade mantra. It inflicts chill and does some decent damage. And next is Ice Chains, which makes chains of ice above your target, indirectly obscuring their vision and screen while directly stunning them once the chains go into play. And next is Ice Eruption, which stomps and erupts ice out of the ground to hit people. Putting a round spark on it turns into a barrier and removes the damage on it, making it a better version of Lightning Blade's Spark variant, so it's just a better domain. Next up is Ice Forge, which brings up a bunch of ice shurikens that will get shot out and auto track onto your opponent. A blast spark will also make them explosive, dealing more damage in exchange for more ether. Next is Ice Smash, which is a really good mantra where you make a club of ice and smash it down, and it is a guaranteed guard break at level 5. There is also Ice Lance, which is like a dashing version of Ice Smash and is also often used before Ice Smash. Holding F also cancels the attack and just uses it kind of like a Gale Lunge, but a little bit worse because there's more end lag on it. Next is Rising Frost, where you take your enemy into the air and then slam them down sometimes. It's alright. Next is Ice Flock, which isn't amazing, but I do love this mantra. It does a lot of posture damage, and it makes a radius in front of you get swarmed by ice birds. It's a pretty good area denial tool, and it's honestly really fun to use, especially in ganks when you're trying to like protect people and you put up your ice flock wall and they can't get through it. And next is Ice Carve, which spawns a ring that does good damage in front of you, spinning around and slashing everything in it. Putting a round spark on it will make it turn you into a Blade. Turning a spring spark on it makes you throw it forward and pull it back. Frost Grab is another grab reskin, but for Frost. Just kidding, this one's actually cool. This is the best grab of any other attunement. You turn invisible and then teleport, grabbing your opponent and putting ice chains on them. And then if you put a blast spark on it, it replaces the ice chains with big ice spikes that impale them in an X formation. It's cool. Next is Ice Cubes. On the first use, it summons ice cubes above you, which you send out by using the mantra again. Putting a multiplying spark on it sends them out individually, which is actually better for pressure, so I'd recommend using it with the spark. Next is Ice Fissure, which allows you to summon ice obelisks up to 3 at a time. If you recast the mantra near an obelisk, all of them explode and apply chill. Next is Ice Skate, which is Snap Gelidus from Rogue Lineage, for those who know. For those of you who don't know what that means, it lets you skate on ice and fly kinda sometimes if you start higher. The Frozone talent also allows you to use it without needing to be near a body of water to cast it. Next is Glacial Arc, which summons an arc of ice that you can use to make ranged platforms either vertically or horizontally to get higher or farther or get across a bridge. It's kinda just like a little makeshift bridge or ladder depending on how you use it. First support mantra up is Frost Wisp, which shoots an ice beam whenever you vent something, putting ice on the floor below you to help proc passives. The next support mantra is Iceberg, which is just Mei from Overwatch. You encase yourself in ice, healing you and protecting you from up to 3 hits while you heal. And finally we have Shadowcast. Dark Blade coming up first is a flurry of 3 slashes imbued with dark energy. Adding a tornado spark adds an additional spinning slash at the end. And next is Shadow Gun, which is pretty good. It is also a ranged guard break at level 5. Putting a blast spark on it turns it into Shadow Gun Barrage, but it also no longer guard breaks in this form, so it is quite a big trade-off. If you are using a hybrid Shadowcast build and can't get Shadow Gun up to level 5 though, I would very much recommend using the Barrage variant because it does more damage and will compensate for the lack of level 5. Next is Clutching Shadow, which is a Star Wars Force choke followed by a slam down into the floor. This mantra is really good in ganks as most people won't be able to counter it super soon because, you know, there's 5 people there and they kind of got to focus on more than just you. Anyway, next is Shadow Chains, which attach to someone, draining ether and slowing them down down and making it much easier for you to hit them. Next is Shadow Eruption, a quick blast and AoE around you that procs Shadow, making Ether not regen. And next is Shadow Seekers, which are big black balls that home in on people and they steal a lot of Ether. And I mean a lot. And for those of you who are going to comment and correct me and say, oh, it's Ether, I don't care. Next is Shadow Roar, where you scream letting out a wave of shadow in a massive AoE. It is interruptible if you get hit, but it's pretty hard to hit you if they get hit by it. And next is Rising Shadow, and this is my least favorite mantra in the entire game. It is so annoying. It raises people up into the air, ragdolling them, and then dropping and dazing them right in front of you. Crazy. Next is Shadow Meteors, which shares a cooldown with Shadow Seekers because it would be unbalanced if they didn't. Like, they had to nerf this because you could just spam both and they'd get stunned by one and then hit by the other. It's stupid. This mantra brings 3 meteors down from the sky and they are aimed with your mouse. They can actually all be moved into different spots as long as you're moving your mouse around, and they do quite a bit of damage and steal a lot of Ether and blind people. Next up is Shadebringer, which is a massive flurry of Shadow Greatsword slashes. This mantra is really good. I would talk about the Spark variants, but all you need to know is that you should be using both Spark variants if you're going to use any. Next up is Eclipse Kick, which is probably the second highest damaging mantra in the game. Too bad it is insanely slow, so it's impossible to land normally. Thankfully, the Spark variant is amazing and makes it possible to potentially land normally. The Multiplying Spark makes it at first a quick dazing high kick, and after landing it you can use it again to do the normal Eclipse Kick, and since they're dazed they can't dodge or run from it, so they have to deal with it directly by trying to parry it. The Spark variant is a really good setup. And next is Shadow Vortex, which is a vortex sucking things in. If you catch someone in it and shoot your shadow gun, it'll explode, doing a ton of damage. The first support move is Shade Devour, which consumes some of your health for a temporary 20% damage buff. It also does a shockwave, pushing people away while it casts. Next is Devouring Eye, which summons a destroyable eye that steals Ether from people who try to cast mantras within its gaze, but it's honestly kind of mediocre and not really worth using. Also inspired by Reyna from Valorant. Next is Shade Wisp, which grants passive tempo and puts a semi-translucent shroud of darkness around you, making it harder to see you from distances, especially at night. And then for mobility, we start off with Encircle, that puts shadow clones around your target before teleporting you to them, hitting them. You can also cast mantras during the teleport or before it to hit them on the teleport with the mantra that you previously casted. And our final mantra is Shadow Assault, which turns you into a big black ball and rushes you forward. Hope you all enjoyed this video. This sucked the life out of me during script writing, and the currently 30-minute recording file, let's see how much editing I'm going to put into this to bring it down from 30 to 14. Shoutouts to Goobcut, Drizzy Drake Fan, and Cyberboy21. I love you all, hope you enjoyed, and goodbye.